They say history is written by the victors, but listen closely, and you can still hear the footsteps of those who were silenced. Hear the low, almost liturgical murmuring of the conferratio ritual, the most sacred, the most powerful of all Roman wedding ceremonies, sound designed to symbolize eternal devotion. But this was just noise. A beautifully woven curtain dropped over the darkest secret of the Roman Empire. Behind the marble columns of the Domus, there was another sound, a sound Rome wanted buried forever. It was the choked cry of a new bride, the echo of a forgotten rule that made the wedding night a legal violation. This is going to disturb you. The Roman Republic was the bedrock of law, but its foundation was built on absolute control, especially over the bodies of women. They crafted laws, like the Lex Papia to limit a woman's wealth, but they crafted an unwritten code to extinguish her very will. The true rule of the wedding night wasn't about love or fertility. It was a devastating declaration of male ownership, an institutionalized trauma no one could prosecute. The brutal truth is that this power, this ancient claim, still casts a shadow today. A shocking modern stat reveals that in the world right now, 1 in 3 countries still has laws that excuse the forced marriage of a child bride. Think about that. An ancient Roman principle of possession still infects modern statute books. You'll never look at history the same way again. Stay with me, because at the end of this script, I'll show you the 3 Latin words that summarize this entire horror and why they matter to you right now. To understand the poison, you have to trace the root. The story doesn't start on the marriage couch. It starts in the heart of Roman law. Patria Potestas. The power of the father, a legal concept so profound it gave the patriarch control over his children, his wife, and his descendants for their entire lives. That was meant, on paper, to be a protective, benevolent authority. In practice, it became the single most dangerous legal doctrine ever devised. The wedding night rule was simply the most intimate, most destructive application of that immense power. The moment the bride entered the groom's household, she passed from one owner to another. Her personhood ceased to exist. This system was an engine for the state. Rome needed soldiers and citizens, and Patria Potestas ensured the most efficient production of them. It made the woman a legal asset, not a spouse. The core belief that sealed the terror was simple. A wife, like property, could not be violated by her owner. The hidden clause of the nuptial chamber was that a legal right cannot be a crime. The emperor's silence was the Senate's decree. That sentence captures the chilling complicity of the highest legal minds in the world. The power of the father became the legal key to the nuptial chamber's hidden clause. Rome didn't need to write down the rule. The law of ownership already covered it. There is a truth about the past that only comes through the voices that were silenced, and the archives only record the husband's name. A young woman named Livia, maybe 14 or 15, stands shivering beneath the flammeum, that vibrant saffron-colored bridal veil that covered her head. It was meant to symbolize the flame of Vesta, the hearth goddess, the warmth of the new home. For Livia, it felt like the weight of a heavy woolen shroud. She had been passed from the Potestas of her father, a modest merchant, to her husband, a brutal centurion, twice her age. This night was not about partnership. Livia had dreamed of the Domus as a sanctuary. But the slow, sickening realization that washes over her is that her new home is a cage, and her marriage bed is the executioner's block. The isolation is absolute. There are witnesses, friends of the groom, maybe a slave, but they are only there to validate the contract, to confirm the new possession. They are not protectors. They are not rescuers. The silence is deafening, broken only by her husband's low commands. The emperor's silence was the Senate's decree. The most chilling loss Livia experiences is the erasure of her right to refuse. She lost her future, her childhood, and her bodily autonomy in the space of a single, horrifying hour, when the first light of dawn struck the marble floor. Livia rose as the wife of the centurion, but she was a ghost of the girl she had been before. What most historical texts leave out is how the husband's claim, sealed in the chamber, transferred ownership from the man to the state, making the trauma an act of civic duty. The power of the Roman father was not just a family matter. It was the foundation of the imperial state. Here is the forgotten testimony from the underbelly of the Domus. The one historians choose to ignore, because it disrupts the narrative of the dutiful Roman wife. The deepest wound was often inflicted not by the husband, but by the mother-in-law, the matron who stood by. These were the women who should have protected the young bride. Instead, they became the silent carriers of the brutal culture. They were the ones who were sworn to secrecy, the ones who performed the preparatory rituals but intentionally omitted the truth about the hidden rite. Think of the cold marble floor beneath the knees of a young bride, kneeling as the matron helped her dress. The matron's eyes, hardened by her own submission decades prior, would hold a look of stern, tragic resignation, not sympathy. This look, this matron's omission, was the ultimate betrayal. It taught the young bride that the system was bigger than even the bonds of womanhood. The rule was perpetuated by a terrifying feedback loop. The victims became the enforcers. The emperor's silence was the Senate's decree. This ritual of silence meant the young bride, the victim, grew up to become the next matron who would teach the next girl to keep her mouth shut. The pain wasn't just physical. It was the realization that the entire female structure of the Domus was built on a foundation of necessary complicity. This is how power structures survive, not just by decree, but by turning the oppressed into the agents of oppression. The destruction here is symbolic. The loss of trust between women, the death of sisterhood, in a world where it was desperately needed. It was the moment the matron confirmed that the rule was more powerful than her motherhood. If you want to find the true, institutional darkness of this rule, don't look at the marriage contract. Look at the laws designed to encourage childbirth. Let me show you where the Roman state made the trauma a requirement. Most people know the Lex Papia Poppaea as a decree passed under Augustus to incentivize marriage and having children. This is the official story. The hidden truth is that this law, while offering legal status and tax breaks for having offspring, turned the woman into a state-owned reproductive vessel. The Roman state was not asking for a family. It was demanding production. The sensory tag here is the cold, metallic gleam of the imperial military standard, the eagle that might have stood sentinel in the atrium of the house. The bride was a territory being conquered. She was required to prove her fertility. Her trauma was a state-required performance. The emperor's silence was the Senate's decree. We see echoes of this in another staggering modern proof. Today, at least 15 countries globally still have rape laws that are either nullified or offer reduced sentences if the perpetrator marries the victim. This is the absolute reduction of a human being to a legal function. Her pain is secondary to her utility. The emotional destruction is the bride's reduction to a legal entity. Her name is erased, her personal history invalidated, and her body is simply a piece of state-mandated machinery. The violation wasn't just physical, it was bureaucratic. What few truly grasp is how this invisible hand of law transcended social class. We tend to think of these horrors as belonging to the plebeians, to the slaves, or to the lower ranks. But the terrifying truth is that the rule of possession, the silence, poisoned all Roman bloodlines, from the poor proletary to the most powerful patrician's dollar. It was the unifying principle of male authority across the republic and the empire. The whispers in the domus of the senator were just as low, just as conspiratorial, as the murmurs in the rented apartment of the soldier. The witness to the marriage could be a slave, a freedman, or a dollar senator. It didn't matter. They were all there to confirm the legal transfer of property. The victims, whether a dollar patrician woman whose father held a consulship or a plebeian woman married to a tradesman, shared the same singular feeling, the crushing weight of institutional inevitability. The emperor's silence was the Senate's decree. The Roman social system was a hierarchy of wealth and status, but it was a perfect meritocracy of male control. Every man, regardless of his standing, had the legal right to silence his wife. The cultural destruction is the loss of all female agency across the social spectrum. The rule stripped away the one thing wealth could not buy: bodily self-determination. The horror wasn't local. It was the systematic, universal denial of a wife's human rights, the ultimate price paid for being born female in the Republic. The greatest trick the empire ever pulled was making the victims think the rule had disappeared. It didn't. The final, most soul-crushing act of this horror was not the violation itself, but the memory erasure that followed. This rule was removed not by a formal repeal, not by a Senate debate or an imperial decree, but by simple, willful omission from the historical record. Imagine the brittle, dry dust of the forgotten archives in Alexandria or the tabularium on the Capitoline Hill. The laws that were preserved were the ones that made Rome look strong, virtuous, and lawful. The documents that would have explicitly detailed the darkest corners of Patria the ones that might have recorded a daughter's plea or a matron's guilt, were simply left to rot, or worse, quietly burned. The emperor's silence was the Senate's decree. This is the chilling legacy of absolute silence. The rule was removed because it was never truly written down in the first place. It was too shameful, too damning. So they let the custom fade and edited the history books to make it look like it never existed. The women, the children, who carried the culture of compliance, were forced to forget the root of their compliance. The destruction here is total, the denial of truth. They died twice, once in the violation, and a second time when the history books refused to acknowledge their suffering. The physical abuse was temporary. The historical gaslighting was eternal. We have traced the machine of control, from the fraudulent sound of the conferriatio, to the chilling complicity of the matron, to the cold, bureaucratic demands of the dollar Lex Papia Poppaea, and finally to the complete self-serving erasure of the truth. That rule, that institutionalized trauma, was never just about a wedding night. It was about defining ownership in the most permanent way possible. The silence of the Roman emperor was the only decree needed to turn half the population into legal chattel. They died twice, once in the dark realization that their marriage was a surrender, and a second time when Rome polished the marble and pretended the law never existed. But the truth always leaves a trace, and the ancient principle of possession still infects modern statute books. 1 in 3 countries still has laws that excuse the forced marriage of a child bride. The machine is still running, just under a different name. The words they tried to erase were dollar corpus, nan meum dollar, my body is not mine. If you understand that this ancient principle is still alive, and that the modern struggle for bodily autonomy is a continuation of this 3,000-year fight against a culture of absolute ownership, then you need to hit that subscribe button. You need to join us as we reveal the next hidden truth that history tried to bury.